Joining me now, global futurist and media commentator Keith Suter. Keith, great to see you tonight. Look, I don't want to get too technical, but I've had a look at your notes, and there are a couple of very key milestones that we now have to look at. Back in 2000, we had a dispute in the United States over a battleground state of Florida, and there was one particular battle that went on for 37 days. There could be as many as 7 as a result of this election. Where is this heading, Keith? Where is this heading? Clearly, it's not in a good direction right now.
Well, it could end up at the Supreme Court, but it may actually be dealt with prior to that time. But both sides are recruiting lawyers. It's not just the Republicans. The lawyers are also being mobilised by the Democratic Party as well. So this is going to be a lawyer's picnic for the next few weeks. So if there's any hint of discrepancy or confusion, that's when the lawyers will step in. Now, as you said, the key date is beginning of December, when each state government needs to certify who won the Electoral College for their state. And then after that, the electors will then gather in Washington to then select the president. If there is no agreement at that time, then that is when you're going to get still more disputes about possibly ending up in the Supreme Court to get things sorted out. Remember, back in the year 2000, the Supreme Court actually stopped the counting in Florida and simply awarded the election to George W. Bush. Now, will we have another rerun of that? We just don't know at this stage. But it is interesting that the more civil attitude that we had between Gore and Bush in the year 2000 is totally missing today. And indeed, Mrs. Clinton at one point was actually saying to Joe Biden, if you lose, get ready to challenge it. So you've got really acrimony on both sides, far worse than we had 20 years ago. And so, yes, this could end up as a lawyer's picnic.
Keith, back in 1876, 2 days before inauguration in late January, it was sorted out because of a similar drama. Gee, I hope we can get this sorted before the inauguration date.
Well, that's right. So you're going back to 1876. General Grant, the president, was stepping down. He had served his 2 terms. Then you ended up with the Republican and Democrat, and again, voting irregularities. The party bosses got together and said, in effect, the Democrats, we will give you the White House, the Republicans, but you Republicans have got to leave the South alone. A lot of people, when they're being taught American history, seem to think that the American Civil War solved issues in the United States. It didn't. The Union won in 1865. That's, of course, when Abraham Lincoln was shot dead, and that's when the people seem to lose interest in the Civil War. Then you get this period for just over a decade when the Union troops were deployed in the southern states to make sure the blacks were treated well. And then as a result of what's called the Great Compromise of 1877, January 1877, just before the inauguration, what happened is that the southern states got the Union troops out, and they then introduced a whole network of segregation laws, etc. So the gains that had been made during the American Civil War were largely removed, except slavery was not reintroduced. But a lot of those gains were lost. And that's why you end up 90 years later with a renewed civil rights movement with Dr. Martin Luther King, etc., because to correct the damage that was done by that other compromise back in 1876. It's a very significant time when you had that deadlock, and then of course the next big deadlock was the year 2000. The American electoral system, even though it's one of the world's oldest, certainly runs into problems from time to time, and with immense consequences that flow on each time that happens.
Keith, we had a president who contracted COVID during the campaign. He went out, did a blitzkrieg of some of those, really key battleground states in the last sort of week or so. Did you ever expect that we'd be talking tonight about the prospect of Donald Trump being re-elected after the polling had clearly suggested that Biden would win this election?
I know what the polls were saying, but if you cast your mind back to August 4 years ago, I was very influenced by what Michael Moore had to say. Michael Moore, 4 years ago, was warning that Trump could win in November because Michael Moore is not a Trump supporter, but he's a Trump demographic. He's middle-aged, non-college educated. He's from the Rust Belt. He's white. And so he was able to understand the Trump voting bloc in a way that Mrs. Clinton's people couldn't. And so he was actually saying to the Democrats, look, you've got to get into these Rust Belt states and show you're still supporting people. Because the Democrats had lost those states. These are traditional blue-collar Democrat voters, but they're alienated by all the political correctness that you now get, the culture wars that are underway, the social justice warriors, and, of course, they've lost their jobs. Because under Bill Clinton, trade deals were negotiated which saw the jobs going offshore, manufacturing going offshore. And Clinton himself was surrounded by all these young technocrats who said the future of America is going to be in banking and finance, etc. Don't worry about these factories. So they lost a lot of votes. And he was trying, 4 years ago, Michael Moore was trying to warn the Democrats that Trump could win. And I actually got into a bit of trouble because I was recycling with attribution Michael Moore's arguments, including the issue that you just touched on with Peter Gleeson.
He said it again, didn't he, Keith?
Sorry?
He said it again. He said 2020 could be a repeat.
Exactly, yeah. So Michael Moore has already warned the Democrats. They don't listen. You know, the problem is the Democrats control the two seaboards. They get all these ideas from the political correct people in New York or San Francisco, and they end up losing the heartland, the red centre of the United States. I think what Trump has done, whether you like him or not, and as you know on this station I've been explaining some of my problems with Trump, particularly in foreign policy, but the fact is he's pulled off an amazing achievement in being able to bounce back at a time when everybody had written him off. He's bounced back, and as we are at this point commenting about how close the vote is. And Trump, of course, has won Florida, which is a great achievement. The way to the White House is through Florida, and it looks like he's got Florida. So that's a very good omen for Donald Trump.
Keith Suter, it's always great to chat. Thank you for joining us tonight. I know you've been really busy today.
Good. Thank you.